Hello, everyone. This is very, very exciting for me. I'm just going to start off with a quick piece from early in the novel. The only real thing that you need to know at this point in the story is that my main character, Myrra, has discovered that her employer, Myrra is something of an indentured servant, has gone up to the top of their building and is threatening to jump off of the ledge, and has also told her that the world is ending. So I think it's wrong to call it a sky if it's made with paint, metal, and lights. It's not the same thing, Imogene said out of nowhere. What does it matter if we don't know any different? This is what the sky is to us, Myrra contradicted. I don't go in on nostalgia for something I've never experienced. Everyone holds up the old world as this amazing thing, but you were born here, same as me. Our mothers were born here. What could we possibly know about it? This was a suspicious sort of freedom, talking with Imogene like this. Myrra caught herself glancing sideways every time she spoke to check and see if she'd crossed a line. Imogene just shrugged. I suppose you're right, but there's nothing wrong in dreaming about the other kind of sky. I never thought about it, Myrra said with all honesty. She hadn't had the space or time to spend philosophizing about real versus manufactured. Too many other worries took priority. She had to get a handle on this situation. Worst case scenario, what do I do if Imogene is right? Myrra balked at the idea, then rallied again. It was important to anticipate the worst, so you'd be ready for it. In Myrra's experience, the worst happened more often than not. So, what's to be done if the world is ending? It might not be, she thought, to comfort herself, but just in case. If I believe you, she started. Imogene looked at her and rolled her eyes at the if. Then how long do we have before the world breaks apart? Marcus told me it would be about 2 months, but it depends. If the wrong gas pocket hits us, it could happen tomorrow. She didn't want to believe Imogene. If the world breaks apart was almost too big to comprehend. But then the next thoughts hit. I'm never going to marry Jake. Han is never going to get that bar. And I am never going to grow old. Then she started thinking of all the ways she might get out of New London while avoiding surveillance cameras. Her expression must have darkened, or maybe Imogene was just following a similar thought pattern, because the next thing Imogene said was, there's a safe embedded in Marcus's bookshelf behind the Mark Twains. I know. Imogene let out a surprised laugh. Yes, you would. She paused. Do you know how to access it? Palm scan. Myrra smiled. It was a good distraction, seeing the shock on Imogene's face. Imogene smiled back, but it was a sad smile. Do what you have to do, she said. A plan was already whirring into motion. She'd knock Marcus out if he was still alive, or if it was as Imogene thought and he was already dead, she'd have to take his hand. Down at Myrra's feet, Charlotte let out a small whimper. The cold must really be getting to her through the blankets. Myrra bent down and picked her up, tucking her halfway inside her robe. She wriggled around a little, but eventually Charlotte's face relaxed and her eyelids stopped twitching. Myrra looked up and saw Imogene watching her daughter with a look of bone-deep grief. It surprised Myrra. This was the most care Imogene had shown Charlotte in the total of her young life. At the very end, she proved herself to be a mother after all. Imogene reached out and touched Charlotte's cheek. Will you take care of her? It was a harsh reminder that soon Myrra and Charlotte would be alone on the terrace, and that there would be an empty spot on top of the wall where Imogene had once stood. Myrra pushed away the thought. Of course, she said, and meant it. She could feel Charlotte's breath against her skin. Imogene leaned closer to Myrra, inspecting her face. Myrra could see the ivory powder of Imogene's foundation clinging to the soft, downy hairs on the sides of her cheeks. What must she see in my face when she looks this close? I'm so sorry, she said. It was hard to tell whether she meant that she was sorry for the way she'd treated Myrra all these years, or for telling her it was all ending. In a rare positive moment, Myrra decided to think the best of her and assumed she was sorry for all of it. Myrra could feel the warmth radiating off of Imogene's skin. Imogene leaned closer to her face, impossibly close, and kissed her. Then she pulled back, stood, and kicked her body out past the wall and into the stillness of the air. It felt to Myrra as though Imogene's body hovered there in front of her for an unbearable length of time, so long that she worried something had happened to the gravity. Her nightgown and stray wisps of hair pooled around her body as though in water. Her skirts hovered up around her shoulders, and Myrra saw her pale nakedness, her immaculate, vulnerable flesh. Imogene had her eyes squeezed shut and her mouth open wide enough to swallow the world. Then the moment passed, and Imogene dropped like a sickened, ungraceful lump. Myrra leaned over to watch her descend, so far that she couldn't see or hear the body's impact when it finally struck the sidewalk.
Oh my gosh. I feel personally victimized by this book. Um, uh, I speechless. I mean, what a stellar book. What an incredible ride. What a journey. And that opening, I mean, it's so I loved every moment of it. I was like, where's it going? Where's this ooh, but like maybe it won't be what it is. And then it's like, no, she is very dead. They are all doomed. Nothing, I mean, I would say spoiler alert, but I feel like you do a great job of letting us know how doomed they are from the very
I do hope so.
my
That
friend.
means a ton coming from you, because pretty much every single time I read any of your work, it just kind of dismantles my brain in the best possible
Oh, that
way.
is so good. I mean, my friend Angeline Rodriguez, who's your editor, I was texting her and I was like, Angeline, I feel like I had all these moments where I thought, but like maybe it'll work out for them. Like maybe things won't turn out to be so dire. Like maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe they think it's gonna be bad and then it gets better and but then it doesn't. And Angeline's like, yeah, we worked really hard at that. So I say all of that
Angeline is wonderful.
as a prelude to my first question, which is I'd love to know what came first, the world of this novel or this like incredibly propulsive plot, which I guess for the people who haven't read, could you also give us just the barest, skimmest of outlines?
Yeah. Um, so I think I'll just answer your question and then kind of give an outline in the course of it. But like basically I came up with the idea of an inevitable apocalypse and of a person kind of finding out before anybody else, really more first before anything. Um, and the book itself does a thing where it kind of tells you right away that there are problems with this ship, and that they're pretty inevitable. The ship, also known as the world, everybody's living in this ship, and it's, I guess in sci-fi terms it's called a generation ship, but basically inside the ship it is almost exactly like the world around us would be. Some things are a little left of center, like you don't find a lot of paper, for example, because things burning in spaceships is a bad idea. And all of the landscapes are entirely manufactured, so they often have sort of a little bit of an artsy twinge to them rather than just being a plain old mountain or a field. But Myrra, the main character, very early figures out that that the world is going to break apart, the world, which is this ship, and that everybody inside is going to die. And from there, this also is a fairly dystopian world, and the way that people got on the ship was by buying their passage on. And so people that didn't have the money sold themselves into sort of a modern indentured servitude with the guarantee that their descendants would be free once this ship reached its destination, which is some galaxy away. And so Myrra is one of these servants, and therefore when she finds out that the world has ended or is going to end, and she realizes that she's living on borrowed time, she decides to get the hell out of Dodge, and has to sort of go on the run because her bosses just killed themselves, but it looks suspicious. And then also she's not supposed to leave. She's an indentured servant. She's essentially enslaved, and she shouldn't go anywhere. And so she goes on the run. This second character that I have in the book is this government worker named Tobias, who's tasked with going and finding her. And then it's them sort of going on a chase as the world is breaking apart. Um, and then kind of coming to realizations as the world is breaking apart, and finding sort of human connection as the world is breaking apart. Um, and I remember that I started out having just the thought of, what if somebody knew about an apocalypse, and then instead of having to like do the Armageddon thing and like race to destroy the asteroid, what would it be if the story was just a person going through their own mortality and trying to figure out the best way to live at the end? And it turns out that that's not a very propulsive plot. And so my editor, Angeline, was incredibly instrumental in helping me kind of push through. I had certain elements to keep the plot going, but then she was very, very helpful in really drawing that out and making sure that we really did create some sort of a reason to keep going and keep reading, even if the whole world is ending.
Uh, I mean, it works so exquisitely, I feel, because there is, the sort of immediate term, Mira and the baby are like on the run. They've got to like problem solve their way out of like how to move through a society where everything is digital and therefore available to be surveilled. Also,
Yeah.
also like it's a world, but it's a ship. So like, where do you hide? Like the concept of being able to go and like, it is possible to search everywhere in the ship. Like you can't, there's nowhere to hide. And so like that sort of impossible paradox is at work in the plot, but there's also all of the sort of like larger machinery of this world, the civilization like grinding to a halt. And I mean, it's just so exquisitely balanced. And I feel like the book does this incredible thing with the world building where, like, for whole tracks of time, because we're just like, we're with Mira in the moment, like moving through the world. We're like, well, of course we're gonna go to the seedy town, and of course we're gonna hide out in the hotel, and of course we're gonna like swipe this card that we've got. Like, of course, like naturally. And it's only in moments of like high tension that we're aware of like how uncanny it all is. So for me, one of those moments was there's an earthquake and a sort of like Atlantean underwater city, and like there's this horrible sort of ecological disaster, which LOL, ecological disaster on a ship in space. Your mind. So after the disaster, they're like in the caves and they're like, ooh, this is kind of spooky. And I'm like, yeah, they're in the spooky caves. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Are those caves spooky? Like somebody designed those
Somebody
caves.
built.
Somebody built those caves. And then it's like someone built those mountains. And also like what is going on? And so like could you talk a little bit about because I sense that you were just like having a lot of fun with the world building. So could you talk a little bit about the world building and some of the how you use the world building to both advance plot but also to bring in some of those really interesting existential questions about what does it mean to be a human or live in a society or like what is a world?
Absolutely. So yeah, like I did have a lot of fun with the world building. I'm I'm a bit of a nerd for design and for artsy fartsy things. And so this was kind of like a fun way for me to kind of just dream up, like, if you did have some, like it never really gets explained, but for some reason, the rest of humanity's on this ship now, and we're not back on the home planet anymore. But if you did have to evacuate your planet, and then somebody went and like basically paid to design this world for you to live in for about 150 years, just generations, um, you know, what would that ultimately end up being? And then I started thinking of like, well, if we did this right now, like this second, Elon Musk would certainly get involved. And probably Richard Branson and probably Apple and probably like, and then people would be like, well, since we're here, let's really design this thing, and like, and so it's very much like the natural world, but you do have just these elements, at play that, instead of building a mountain that's a mountain, what if you made it with stained glass? And so then there's stained glass involved in the mountain, or you like mash up. I had a lot of fun basically mashing up everything in the world that I found interesting just in general as well. Like I really love cliff cities, and I think that, like going and seeing the ruins of Petra would be an amazing thing, and seeing, just the way that people have lived in that kind of way. So that goes in there. But then also there has to be a sea, and there has to be a certain diversity of landscapes, because people are also trying to just smash as much of the world as they can into an area that's
Mm.
about the size of Switzerland. But also, as I was doing that, I don't actually love world building for world building's sake, because I think, especially, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, especially in like not great sci-fi and fantasy. Like there's some really great sci-fi and fantasy that does world building, and it's incredible. And like even like really intense world building, say like Tolkien or something, you can do it and it's really incredible. But like sometimes you'll get some stuff where it's literally just like it just goes on and on and on and on, and it doesn't actually affect the plot. And so I was really careful. I wanted to have any world building that was in there mean something. And one of the books that I get really inspired by, and it's an epigraph in the book, is Invisible Cities. And Invisible Cities, by Calvino, does this really amazing thing where the whole book is nothing but Marco Polo describing cities to you for these like really beautiful vignette prose poems. But it's never actually about the city at all. It, like, by the time that he finishes describing Zaira or whichever city he's talking to you about, he's actually talking about the human condition in some way.
Mm.
And so I would do these interstitial chapters in the book, and they would basically be there to describe some world building that would feel really shoehorned in if I gave it to a character and a character's point of view. But then I tried to make it so that anytime I was describing, say, this underwater city in Palmer, or this mountain town, that it was also somehow going to tell you something about maybe how the world was built, and how countries conflict with each other, or how people don't know how to handle endings, or how people don't know how to handle fear, and what all of that is. um, and so hopefully the world building would also ultimately reveal something about, yeah, governments or people or love or class. There's a lot of class. um, and how all that kind of stitches together, how like no building is just a building. It has a myriad of like stories and ideas, and and flaws of humanity behind it. um
Yeah,
and how that can kind of come together.
absolutely. I often find that like the monuments that a people, a culture, a nation build, like we tell the stories of ourselves and our histories and our monuments. And I feel
Mhm.
like this book is very much like deeply interested in that idea because almost every little, I mean, I wanted to hang out in all of the towns. I wanted to hang out in all of them. And I had a great time exploring them. And I'm just like, is there like a director's cut where there are more cities? But um so, as you say, like it's sort of using the idea of the generation ship, and I just want to say that like that is one of my favorite things in all of science fiction. I love a generation ship. I love a humanity in space. Hit fast forward 300 years. What are we like next? I simply cannot get enough of that. I think a lot about Neil Stevens's book, Seven Eves,
Yeah.
and that book just being oh, amazing. But it did make me also think about the fact that oftentimes with generation ships, those stories tend to involve like a big jump forward in time. Like
Mhm.
it tends to involve like thousands of years. And like there's not an inconsequential time jump in this, like we're not talking like 10 years or something. It's like they've been in space for centuries, like a lot, like multiple generations have passed. But I also feel like this book made me realize like, oh yeah, actually, like 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, that's actually not that long. That's
Yeah.
actually not that many generations at all. And so the culture that we encounter in this book, it looks a lot like contemporary culture, which is both like harrowing and also really electrifying because that lets you get at some of these like really urgent questions that we're tackling today. So I guess my next question is just like how did you decide on the time scale and like what you were doing, like the sort of scale of the book, why that scale, and was it because you were interested in a sort of like near contemporary ghost of apocalypse future analog to our current time?
Yeah, I think I was more interested in keeping the world fairly close to what we had already here. And I did like there were various points in earlier drafts where I was completely not doing the math properly. And there was a thing where I was like, yeah, there's been like 5 generations in the course of 150 years. It's like, no, there's not. That's not how that works at
I mean,
all.
depend. I mean, so
I mean, like
maybe.
maybe they all have babies at 15. I don't know.
That's a very different part of America, I feel. I know that part of America as I am from there. But yeah, I mean, I was like, yeah, that's not like 30 generations. That's like maybe two and a half.
Yeah. um and I was like, especially at the start, I was interested in the world building, but I was more interested in kind of like what the psychology of a thing would be. If somebody told you something this catastrophic, like how would you piece it together and how would you deal with it? And so I think out of sheer pragmatism, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go too far in the future. um and I did think about it in terms of like how much progress would exist, because to your point, like when I did really think about it, I'm like, okay, so where were we 150 years ago? That would have been about 1870. And we have like sped up technology wise quite a bit, but I also figured like if you as a society had been spending all of your energy to build a generation ship, maybe you'd be working a little less hard in the next generation of iPhone. And so the technology is like updated but similar, and everything runs pretty smoothly, but it's relatively similar. And so also I had this feeling like, or this idea that if the world was in a state where you were having to build a generation ship and head out, there would be a period of time where you were really like most of your resources were working towards survival. And so things do end up at a bit of a standstill, but it progresses enough. It's just like it seems like once people get in the ship, they're kind of just like worried about working to get to where they're going. But occasionally they build underwater cities, so they have some stuff to do. But yeah, so I did kind of have to like parcel all that out, and it definitely like I wasn't great at the math of it at first. And so that was definitely me having to do some trial and error and actually like think back over like the past 20th century and what that actually did, and how that would have been different. But I kind of always pictured it being something that happened, not that everybody boarded a ship not that far into the future from where we were now.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I'm glad you did all of that because it what you end up getting is like I feel like yes, there are those stories that use the generation ship that are telling this like massive story that's like trying to do some like Odyssean sort of and the human condition and we are this X, Y, and Z. And I feel like what you get in this book is ultimately something that's like much more like subtle and like much more tuned in to the sort of granular changes that have happened in society and the granular changes that have not taken place
Yeah.
and to me it feels like you get into the immediacy of the characters lives and so part of what makes it feel so contemporary is that we are just like so flush to the characters and their day to day and their day to day doesn't look too different from where we are now because honestly like it's not like like where are they going like they live on a ship in
Yeah,
space.
yeah, they can't do any more space travel. They're already there. So like that bit's there. Yeah, and I spent a lot of time wanting it to be as much of a character story as possible. And there are those books that are just like gigantic and you're telling, the whole world and different societies and this and this and that. But honestly, like that I don't think that's who I am as a writer, and I think I would have done a pretty piss poor job of it if I tried. um, and and so I was much more interested. Like the books that I was reading at the time, around the time that I was doing that, were like a lot of weird existential experimental literature, and then stuff like Station 11 or The Memory Police, things like that, where it is like you're still seeing these catastrophic things happening, but you're seeing them from very,
Mhm.
very close. And just seeing what a person's mind would go through if you had to just go through all of those changes.
Yeah, I think that's what lends it like a kind of Shakespearean quality as well. I'm thinking, of course, of that sort of opening scene where Imogen is like this like gorgeous spectral figure who like then leaps out into the, I mean, it's like such a Shakespearean image. And the sections of the book that are told in the voice of the world also starts to feel kind of like Shakespearean and also kind of like King James Bible-y a little bit. Like there's something that sort of like great, expansive, leaping language that makes the whole world come to life and sing. And I think that you handle that with such grace and incredible force and ferocity. My next question is just like, so there are some books where like place is a character and we're like setting whatever, but I feel like class is a character in this book. Like it's not just like a theme. Like class is like not only just like a character, but it's also kind of the plot of the book. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your approach to writing about class, what class is doing in the book, and like how you approach like taking it from just like a theme, like a nebulous in the air theme, to like something that's like very concrete and like urgent and is like got its jaws locked around the lives of these characters.
So it was weird because I actually didn't set out to write a book that involved class at all. Um, and it's the whole book.
I
uh,
mean,
but what it ended up being was, I think, like I had a lot of anger in me, possibly, about class just in our day-to-day world around us. And when I was writing the story, it just kept coming up as like a natural extension of what should be happening in the story. Because for one thing, when I was first figuring out who Myrra was going to be as a character, I knew that I wanted a character that was going to discover that the world was ending. And pretty much if you're finding that out and nobody else is, you either are like a top level senator, general, somebody, or you're that general's maid.
mm,
And one of those two characters was interesting to me, and it was not the general. And so, and then also when I was thinking about just like how would a ship like this exist, you would need people that are actually going to work. You couldn't just have a bunch of rich people lounging on couches. And then, like, you know, if it was something that was a ticket that was bought, obviously that wouldn't happen. So then like it all just sort of started spinning out that way. But then it did get angrier and angrier as it went, because Myrra as a character is a person that's been really just beaten down her entire life because she's an indentured servant. And so it became a natural extension of, I think, her point of view in a lot of ways, that that how much of this was a problem and how much it had affected her life, from the fact that she'd never been able to access a good education, even though in like a way that felt very modern and actually close hewn to what we already have. There were definitely laws on the books that said that, you know, workers should have an education, but then nobody was actually monitoring that, so she doesn't. And even characters that are seemingly not quite so poorly, are not quite so badly off, like Tobias, who also is a point of view character. Like his family was wealthy and they kept trying to keep hold of their wealth to the point where they completely screwed it up, and then now they're criminals, and he's in this like strange sort of spiral himself. And so the second I realized that the ship would probably have to be entirely populated by rich people, then then everything got a little angrier. And I just have this feeling that as I was imagining it, that if you got everybody in a small space, like a small Switzerland sized space like that, just everything would become about class in a really like corrupt and pretty awful way. Though not all that dissimilar sometimes from our current times.
I mean, the idea of like, I mean, and we see this in our, I mean, in so many ways in our current time, but along the apocalyptic axis of things that are inflected by class, I guess. Like you have all the rich people getting like climate bunkers. Like they're gonna like they're buying all this land in like Maine and New Zealand
Yeah,
to escape like global warming. And I'm just like, what? Guys, we're on
the
the
sheer
same
ways that people
planet.
use money for rationalizing rather than like doing anything about a problem.
I mean, it, and I mean, but like, you're right. So, like, all of the rich people get on the ship, and then all of the rich people on the ship, their descendants have all these complicated feelings and ideas about wealth. And so, isn't it like Tobias, whose like parents are like, we used to, we went to Cape Cod, and Tobias is like, it's a beach, and his dad's like, but it's the right beach. It's the
Yes.
right. And so it was so delightful to come across these like the ways that signifiers of wealth change when, first of all, everyone who's on the ship is like a descendant of like people who could afford to get on the ship or people who were brought on to be a literal servant class. Like, and then I thought, but like, did they know that was like a servant class? And I'm like, well, Brandon, of course they did. Like that such is true today. Like just like people taking their family friends, their maids on
Yes.
various trips abroad. I'm just like, of course they know.
But
This is
they're definitely a part of the family.
yeah, yeah. Oh my God. The ways in which like people talk about poor people and talk about the servant class, I thought was so perfectly nailed in this book. And of course, Mira's like, well, the world's ending. I'm gonna take this baby and we're gonna get out of here and go like see the world. And the cops are like, well, no, you don't, not so fast. There are rules.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question. The idea of like the cops are chasing Mira and they're trying to be like, well, we gotta bring her back in because rules. And it seems to be like literally in the middle of like a natural catastrophe on this man-made ship. The cops are like, well, we got to arrest her, right? Like the idea. So I guess I'd love to you talk a bit about the ways people's priorities at the end of the world. And did you have as much fun writing the varying responses to the increasing knowledge that the world is ending as it seemed you did in the text?
I had a great time. I know, like, technically the book it can be, again, spoiler free as much as possible, but the book takes some bleak turns, but they never felt especially bleak to me. In fact, I came out of this book after I finished writing. I was like, I don't know, I think that's kind of hopeful.
Okay, wait. So I also felt like it was kind of hopeful. I was like, well, like they definitely died, but like maybe they didn't. I felt like it was kind of I was like finding the one sliver of positive interpretation that I could find. But I felt kind of uplifted. I felt like it was an affirming tale of humanity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's like, what is like, I was kind of interested in the idea of what is a life, right? Because
Mhm.
like a life that's 5 minutes long but is well lived, is that a full life? And like the book as it goes through, Mira starts out the book basically having no choices. She's never had a sense of choice or direction or anything. Everything she's done has either been under direct orders or has been a reaction to something that somebody else has done. And so when she first sets out, having the knowledge that the world's going to end in, say, like weeks, months, something, she's like really just trying to figure out how to live in a lot of ways. And then for me, I think by the end she gets it. Like she does kind of like hit all of these moments that one would want to have in a life. She finds human connection, she gets a sense of motherhood, she forgives her own mother. Like there's all these things that were weighing her down, that by the end of the book, even though the impending disaster is scary, and I tried to make sure that you don't like shy away from that fear, and you don't sit there and go like, well, I guess it's fine and everything's rosy, but also like I personally feel as though the characters at the end of the book end feeling fulfilled. And that's true of Tobias as well, who has like myriad screwed up problems as well. And so like he kind of works through them. And so I, with I'm trying to dance around this and not say too much, but like, they there is like an open-endedness to it at the end, and I like that that's there, not because I think that suddenly magically a wand is going to be waved and everything's better, but because like a life that's well spent and well led could feasibly last 5 minutes and feel like 50 years. And that hopefully them sort of achieving that at the end is meaningful in its own way. And that even though it means nothing, the world means nothing if it explodes, if it goes away tomorrow, the galaxy will still exist. There's still a meaning there for you as a person, um, without getting too prescriptive. But
Yeah.
like that was kind of a lot of the thoughts that I had regarding that. But yeah, I had a lot of fun writing all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in some ways this book is like it's a propulsive thriller, but it's also just like a deeply existential treatise. Like it's very like Sartre by way of like Beckett. Like it's very
I did read a
ruminative.
ton of Beckett. Like I'm a big Beckett person, and I have like just all of it on my bookshelves. And then while I was doing this, I was every once in a while, if I got stuck, I was like, let's go check out what Sam has to say. While somebody's getting buried up to their waist and then their neck, but still babbling on about how they need to just keep going and all this stuff. It like that felt very true to what people really do. And I feel like that would, like, if something this catastrophic were to happen, you would have people freaking out, but you would also have people worrying about their lawns, because what else is there to do? Like, what really is there to do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel really proud. I feel very proud of spotting the Beckett vibes. And it's just like the really delightful way that you draw things into seeming contradiction and paradox. Like the people who are sort of like the fact that people are still being held to their quote unquote contracts, even as it becomes really clear that things are not all as they seem. You know, this idea also of like the fact that you've gotten all these people on a ship to save humanity and you're sending them out as like humanity's last great hope, and it's still like a very much stratified society, and it's just like this sort of seeming contradiction of like hope and optimism, and also like, but who's gonna pour our tea? Like certainly not me. It's just, and like that feels just like so paradoxical and so deeply true to our contemporary moment.
Yes, and there's just like the number of, like, I know we were kind of mentioning this before, but like the number of ways that people rationalize horrible things
Mm.
in the world. I mean, it's gone on throughout history, obviously, and America is littered with it. But even today, you have all of these rationales. Well, like, this has to be this way because of the taxes, or because of the school system, or because we have to make sure that we're secure, or whatever. um and uh and generally, as I was going through, like, I could just think up 50 different ways that somebody could rationalize indentured servitude and not call it slavery, and call it like an inclusion program for people that couldn't afford tickets. And we need to have them in servitude because then that way there's more jobs, and then there'd be more spots for the indentured servants, like, because this way we're providing work, all of that.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
that is like today textbook already happening.
yeah, I mean, they kept saying indentured servants, and I was like, that is chattel slavery. But we should pivot over to the Q&A box. And a question from Angelina. Oh, I can't wait to hear this. Please tell us about your childhood fandoms that formed your appreciation for genre fiction today.
So for me, childhood fandoms. So I'm always a big genre fiction person. I was quite obsessed with the television show Alias when I was a teenager. Desperately wanted to be a spy forever and ever and ever. Would not have worked. I'm terrible at lying. But so that I was really into, let's see, I was really into this series by Lloyd Alexander, which the Black Cauldron's a part of, which is basically like Lord of the Rings light.
Mm.
It's like intro Lord of the Rings for kids. He also wrote this really beautiful book called The Iron Ring that was really cool. And God, like the second somebody asks me questions like this, it all like flees out of my head. The Neverending Story is like
Ooh, yeah.
forever my favorite thing. Also, like, just like one of my top desert island books that I first started reading when I was like in my early teens and just continue to reread all the time is The Princess Bride, by William Goldman, which again just like pulls 50 different hat tricks with genre and voice, um, was something that I just thought was hilarious and wonderful when I was a kid. And then as an adult, I was reading it and just going, this is genius. This is incredible. This writing, it's so cool. So those would be my biggies.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love all of those. That's so I love that you were like a secret like gothic romantic. Like there's a real sort of romantic impulse in all of those, I
I
feel.
tried really hard to be a goth. I was really bad at it. And I just ended up wearing a lot of black Gap tank tops and cargo pants.
Wow, that is so relatable.
Yeah,
Same.
I was not rebellious enough, but I wanted to be. And so I like half-assed it. It was really bad.
The fact goths buying from the Gap. Now that is a short story that I would love to read.
Yeah.
So this is from Jackson for both of you. Which is your favorite city on the ship?
For me, I would say I think I would say Nabat. I like Nabat. It seems like she could have hung out there for a while if things had gone better.
Honestly, I got that vibe from the book. I was like, she does not want to leave this city. I mean, like, she leaves. She doesn't really, like, leave Nabat, if you know what I
Spaced
mean.
out.
No, I mean, yeah, same. That was mine, I think, was Kittimer. I really loved Kittimer. What a vibe. It's so, like, woo-woo, faux spiritual. There's, like, a death match there, of sorts. No spoilers in the book. I loved Kittimer. Kittimer was a fave.
So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, which is full of woo-woo hippie towns where like people will just they'll just do an amalgamation of like all the religions. They will be Presbyterian and have their Buddha prayer flags up and all this. And so I think I kind of put a lot of that into there. Specifically, Ashland, Oregon feels a lot like Kittimer to me.
Ooh, oh,
It's like a baby Kittimer.
you heard it here first, folks. Ashland, Kittimer, analogs. And this one's from Colin. What was the world building process like for the book? I was particularly interested in Kittimer after reading the small chapter about it. I think we've got some Kittimer fans, hardcore Kittimer fans in the chat. Maybe a sequel? Who knows? Maybe a prequel?
A spin-off, yeah, just
I
hanging out in the city. We'll just follow some cops.
I would listen, I would read that. Law and Order Kittimer, are you joking?
Only if we could resurrect Jerry Orbach. um, so yeah, Kittimer was an especially hard needle to thread for me because that was one of the things that just kept on getting. It was the most balancing process throughout the different editing processes of the different drafts was trying to figure out a way to really mash in as many world cultures as I could without it ever feeling shoehorned or obvious, but just basically like I wanted to give the idea in nice, subtle, just sort of environmental ways that this world that they were living in is, it contains all cultures, but mashed together into an area the size of Switzerland. So what you'd end up having is like over the span of 150 years, things start to mash together. Food is now all fusion. It just is, and same thing with religion. And there are, these places throughout the world that are sort of they are towns unto themselves, but they also are religious pilgrimages. And then I had this idea of, so you would probably have something like that here, especially on a generation ship, like people are going to get religious, like that's going to be a thing. You're already living on the edge a little bit. And so like, what would that be if you had to smash it into such a small area? And so you end up getting just all these different temples and all these different religions coming together, and what would that sound like? So I had this idea that like bells are going like all the time, but it's different bells from different temples and churches. Sometimes it's the Catholic, sometimes it's Buddhist, sometimes it's like it's this fantastic Islamic service of some sort. And so like I did a ton of research and sort of just came up with all these different ideas and then kind of put them together. It was really fun looking up all the names of different bells and and finding out which ones did which. And also just like the idea of this place too, you'd kind of it like ends up with its own horrible set of problems when it comes to class and this and that, but it kind of erases a bunch of other things in the process. Like you wouldn't really have countries the same way you had before, so you wouldn't look at a person and go, oh, that person's Japanese, or oh, that person is black, or maybe still say that they were black, I don't know, but like you wouldn't say anything by country, and you wouldn't say anything with the same cultural history that you had before,
Mhm.
because it's kind of gone. And so things just kind of get mashed up. And I feel like it's most true in Kittimer for that, because it focuses on religion so much. There's like a lot of different elements of that in there.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. It was incredible. It was amazing. I loved reading about Kittimer. It was, yeah, like I said before, it was my favorite city in the whole shebang.
I'd go for a pilgrimage there. It'd be pretty good.
Honestly, they must
Plus,
do
there's
a
all that
lot of.
stained glass. It would be kind of fun. It would be all these colors. I like
Hmm.
colors.
And the dervishes. Oh, the
The
dervishes.
dervishes. Yeah,
Oh my
that made
goodness.
me happy.
I think we were supposed to stop, so we've already gone over what we were
Oh gosh,
allotted.
yeah. I just noticed the time.
Oh, but it was so much fun. I don't want to stop. It's, oh my gosh, I could talk. I have this whole question about like diaspora that I want to get into, but we will save that perhaps for Twitter.
Yes, absolutely.